Famous Georgia novelist Carson McCullers was a Southern Gothic writer. I've always used the adjective phantasmagoric to describe her writing, meaning it has a grotesque and outlandish quality, but Southern Gothic is more precise. I once critiqued Wise Blood, the celebrated Southern Gothic novel by Flannery O'Connor, as, quote, the poorly composed product of a feverish mind. Some readers question my credentials to offer such a criticism. Other than a lifelong love of reading, I really don't have any, but we all have a right to express opinions about books. Like the soldier admonished that no such word as cooter existed in Webster's dictionary, he replied, I have as much right to make a dictionary as Mr. Webster. Southern Gothic writers create works having, quote, irrational, horrific, and transgressive thoughts involving a violation of moral or social boundaries, grotesque characters, dark humor, and an overall angst-ridden sense of alienation. In other words, they like to push the envelope. Lists of Southern Gothic writers include, among others, William Faulkner and Eudora Welty of Mississippi, Harper Lee of Alabama, and Georgians James Dickey, Brainerd Cheney, Carson McCullers, Flannery O'Connor, and Erskine Caldwell, some of whom certainly wrote with an angst-ridden sense of alienation. But not Harper Lee. She wrote a best-selling novel rooted in realism rather than dreamlike or nightmarish exaggeration. Her To Kill a Mockingbird characters were entirely believable, not grotesque or distorted. Through realism, she managed to raise awareness of injustice, and her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel became America's most beloved and arguably finest work of fiction. 200 years from now, readers of To Kill a Mockingbird will have some idea of what it was like to live in the South in the 1930s. The same won't be true for readers of the exaggerated, nightmarish works of Flannery O'Connor and Erskine Caldwell. There isn't a consensus about which authors belong to the Southern Gothic genre and which don't. Even the authors themselves didn't agree. Eudora Welty protested, "They better not call me that," in response to a suggestion that her writing was Gothic. Others seemed to feel the same way. Erskine Caldwell scoffed at the notion that his Tobacco Road characters were exaggerated. He said, quote, I wrote the book about the familiar scenes and familiar people of my native Georgia. The story of Tobacco Road was concerned with the world as I knew it to be during that particular era for the white and black people who lived difficult lives together in the rural South. Caldwell protested too much. Those who lived with and studied tenant farmers knew that many were God-fearing, hard-working, decent people. A sociologist of the era noted that he always saw two items in tenant houses in Greene County, Georgia in the 1930s and 40s, a Bible and a photograph of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Readers of Tobacco Road wouldn't know that because none of Caldwell's characters were God-fearing, hard-working, or decent. His was a land populated by ghouls. Many Southern Gothic novelists were superb writers, but their subject matter, purposefully repellent, repelled some readers, especially those who resented the distorted depictions of the people and places they knew. What prompted writers to create in the Southern Gothic genre? Perhaps their creativity was linked to their struggles with depression, substance abuse, mistreatment, or disease. Carson McCullers, who dealt with alcoholism and severe depression, attempted suicide. Faulkner and Dickey were alcoholics. Caldwell chafed under a strict and unforgiving Protestant upbringing, and O'Connor dealt with serious chronic illness throughout her creative years. All that sadness, turmoil, and torment yielded a bumper crop of gifted writers inclined towards darkness. It was as if their muses were gargoyles. The Carson McCullers novella, The Ballad of the Sad Cafe, serves as a fine example of Southern Gothic dark exaggeration. The story is set in a failing village in the South, presumably in Georgia, circa 1940s. Here's how McCullers described one character getting the attention of another. Quote, the hunchback stood at the end of the barbecue pit. his pale face lighted by the soft glow from the smoldering oak fire. He had a very peculiar accomplishment, which he used whenever he wished to ingratiate himself with someone. He would stand very still, and with just a little concentration he could wiggle his large pale ears with marvelous quickness and ease. This trick he always used when he wanted to get something special out of Miss Amelia, and to her it was irresistible. Now, as he stood there, the hunchback's ears were wiggling furiously on his head, but it was not Miss Amelia at whom he was looking this time. The hunchback was smiling at Marvin Macy with an entreaty that was near to desperation. Seeing that his accomplishment was getting him nowhere, he added new efforts of persuasion. He fluttered his eyelids so that they were like pale trapped moths in his sockets. He scraped his feet around on the ground, waved his hands about, and finally began doing a little trot-like dance. In the last gloomy light of the winter afternoon, he resembled the child of a swamp haunt. Carson McCullers may have buried a deeper meaning in that passage, but it just seems bizarre. Southern Gothic writers may have known a South populated by such characters, but I don't. Thank goodness, because who wants to bump into someone whose fluttering eyelids are like pale trapped moths in their sockets? That's phantasmagoric. Thank you for watching this Georgia Backroads program.